Very few places in Britain have managed to survive for more than 5 centuries without losing control, ownership, or relevance. Althorp Mansion is one of those rare places. Established in 1508, Althorp Mansion emerged during a period when power in England was fragile and unpredictable. Royal favor could elevate a family one year and destroy it the next. Estates were frequently divided, seized, or lost through political conflict and poor succession. Many noble houses disappeared within a single generation. Yet while countless estates faded into history, Althorp endured. From the beginning, Althorp was not built merely as a residence. It was conceived as a permanent anchor of influence. The estate became the ancestral seat of the Spencer family, a lineage that understood a fundamental principle of power. Visibility creates risk, but structure creates survival. Rather than competing for attention, Althorp focused on continuity. In early 16th century England, money was unreliable. Wealth could be confiscated, taxed, or erased by political decisions. Titles were unstable. Land, however, offered stability. Land produced food, supported labor, and controlled daily survival. Those who controlled land controlled influence. Althorp was built around this reality. The estate managed extensive agricultural lands that supported surrounding communities. Employment, housing, and livelihoods flowed from the land itself. This dependency created loyalty without force and authority without confrontation. Power became part of everyday life rather than a visible display. One of the most important reasons for Althorp's survival was its approach to inheritance. Many estates weakened over time because land was divided among heirs, fragmenting influence with each generation. Althorp avoided this fate through careful succession planning. The estate was treated as a single structure rather than personal property. Individuals came and went, but the system remained intact. As England moved through religious reform, political upheaval, and social transformation, Althorp adapted quietly. It did not resist change aggressively, nor did it attempt to dominate new systems. Instead, it absorbed change while preserving its foundation. Architectural modifications reflected evolving times, but the estate's purpose remained constant. During periods when many aristocratic families lost land due to debt or mismanagement, Althorp remained economically functional. Its land continued to produce value, insulating it from volatility. The estate did not rely on fragile or temporary forms of wealth. Today, Althorp Mansion is often viewed as heritage, admired for its architecture, gardens, and history. Yet beneath this appearance lies a deeper truth. Ownership remains continuous. The structure remains intact. Influence remains preserved. Althorp Mansion was never built to dominate history. It was built to outlast it. Althorp Mansion did not survive centuries by resisting change. It survived by controlling structure. From the 16th century onward, the greatest threat to elite estates was not politics or conflict alone, but fragmentation. Many powerful families collapsed because their land and authority were divided across generations. Althorp avoided this fate through discipline rather than ambition. The Spencer family treated Althorp as an institution, not a personal possession. Ownership was never absolute. It came with obligation, limitation, and long-term responsibility. The estate could not be casually sold, divided, or reshaped according to individual preference. Continuity always mattered more than personality. Inheritance was managed carefully to preserve unity. While other estates weakened as land was split among heirs, Althorp remained intact. Authority passed forward in a controlled manner, ensuring that influence was never scattered. This approach protected the estate from internal collapse, which destroyed many aristocratic houses long before external pressures ever reached them. Legal structure played a crucial role in this survival. Trusts, settlements, and inheritance arrangements shielded Althorp from instability. These systems ensured that the estate was protected from personal debt, poor judgment, or temporary misfortune. Even when individuals struggled, the structure remained secure. This separation between individual success and institutional survival created resilience. Althorp did not depend on one strong generation. It was designed to function across many, regardless of circumstance. Equally important was Althorp's approach to visibility. While some estates sought influence through constant political presence or public recognition, Althorp exercised restraint. The family understood that visible power attracts resistance, while quiet power becomes accepted. Althorp's influence operated through consistency rather than confrontation. It was not aggressive nor withdrawn. It simply remained stable. Over time, its authority became normalized. It did not need to be announced or defended. Economic discipline reinforced this structure. Althorp continued to function as a productive estate rather than a symbolic one. Agricultural land remained central to its stability, ensuring steady value even during periods of national economic stress. The estate avoided reliance on speculative or volatile forms of wealth. As Britain modernized, many historic estates failed to adapt. Some resisted change and collapsed. Others surrendered control for short-term security. Althorp followed neither path. It adjusted gradually, preserving its foundation while absorbing new realities. This is why Althorp Mansion continued to exist as power shifted around it. Not because it demanded attention, but because it was built on discipline, structure, and patience. Althorp Mansion's endurance was not sustained by architecture or tradition alone. It was sustained by land and by the system built around it. In early England, land ownership was not merely a sign of wealth. It defined social order. Land determined who worked, who lived securely, and who depended on whom. Althorp's surrounding. Estates supported farming communities whose survival was directly tied to the land itself. This created a structure where influence operated quietly. Through everyday necessity, employment, housing, and stability flowed outward from the estate. Families worked the land, lived on it, and relied upon it for continuity. This dependency did not require force or pressure. It became part of daily life. Over time, Althorp's authority felt natural rather than imposed. Unlike short-lived power structures that relied on visibility or confrontation, Althorp's influence functioned through permanence. The estate did not need to assert control openly. Its presence shaped behavior without resistance. Power became less visible precisely because it was stable. This relationship between land and community insulated Althorp from instability. When political authority shifted or economic systems changed, the estate's foundation remained intact. People continued to work the land. Food was produced. Daily routines continued. While external conditions fluctuated, Althorp's internal structure stayed steady. Many estates weakened because they treated land as a commodity rather than a responsibility. Parcels were sold to solve short-term problems, slowly eroding influence. Althorp avoided this mistake. Land was preserved and managed with continuity in mind. Immediate profit was never prioritized over long-term survival. Agricultural productivity provided resilience during periods of national stress. When markets faltered or new forms of wealth emerged, Althorp remained functional. Its value was grounded in something tangible and renewable, rather than fragile or speculative. Equally important was the estate's distance from confrontation. Althorp did not attempt to dominate surrounding communities openly. Authority developed through reliability rather than pressure. This subtle approach reduced resistance and allowed acceptance to form gradually. As Britain modernized, traditional relationships between land and society began to change. Communities became less dependent on individual estates, and new economic models emerged. Althorp adjusted quietly, preserving relevance without abandoning its foundation. This is why Althorp Mansion endured when others declined, not because it controlled loudly, but because it controlled patiently. Land created stability. Stability created acceptance. Acceptance created longevity. And longevity became Althorp's defining strength. Althorp Mansion's survival was not based on resistance to change. It was based on controlled adaptation. As Britain moved from the early modern period into industrialization and political reform, many historic estates struggled to remain relevant. New forms of wealth emerged, old systems weakened, and traditional land-based power faced increasing pressure. Some estates resisted change and collapsed under financial strain. Others surrendered control in exchange for short-term security. Althorp chose a different path. Rather than opposing transformation, the estate adjusted quietly. It absorbed new realities without allowing them to disrupt its foundation. Economic models evolved, but land ownership remained central. Political authority shifted, but legal protection preserved continuity. Althorp did not abandon tradition. It refined it. One of the estate's greatest strengths was its ability to remain flexible. Without becoming visible, Althorp avoided public confrontation and refrained from overt political positioning. This reduced exposure during periods of reform and minimized risk. By staying largely outside public conflict, the estate preserved stability while others became targets of scrutiny. Modernization required careful balance. Infrastructure improved, architectural updates were introduced, and management practices evolved. Yet these changes were never allowed to compromise the estate's core purpose. Every adaptation served continuity rather than novelty. Althorp modernized just enough to remain functional, never enough to invite attention. This restraint protected the estate during periods of economic uncertainty. While some landowners accumulated debt to maintain appearances, Althorp avoided excessive display. Financial discipline ensured that the estate remained solvent and independent. It did not rely on fragile income sources or speculative ventures. As social structures changed, Althorp adjusted its relationship with surrounding communities. Dependence became less direct, but connection remained. The estate preserved influence not through dominance, but through presence. It remained a stable element in a rapidly changing environment. Political reform altered the balance of power in Britain, reducing the authority of traditional elites. Yet Althorp adapted without resistance. It accepted structural change while maintaining ownership and legal protection. Influence shifted from overt control to quiet relevance. By the time Britain entered the modern era, Althorp had already transitioned from active authority to embedded stability. It no longer needed to assert power openly. Its influence was secured through continuity, reputation, and institutional memory. Today, Althorp Mansion exists comfortably within modern Britain, appearing as heritage rather than authority. But this appearance is itself a strategy. The estate remains controlled, protected, and intact. Althorp survived not because it refused change. Althorp Mansion's survival was never dependent on tradition alone. It was secured through law. As Britain's political and economic systems evolved, legal frameworks became one of the most powerful tools for preserving elite estates. Althorp was protected not only by land and discipline, but by carefully constructed legal structures designed to shield it from instability. These mechanisms ensured that ownership remained continuous even as individuals changed. Trusts, settlements, and inheritance arrangements played a central role in this protection. Althorp was never fully exposed to personal risk. Assets were structured in a way that prevented fragmentation, sale, or loss through individual misjudgment. Even when circumstances shifted, the estate itself remained insulated. This separation between the individual and the estate was deliberate. No single family member had unrestricted control. Ownership came with responsibility, limitation, and obligation. The estate existed beyond personal ambition, ensuring that short-term decisions could not undermine long-term stability. Legal protection also shielded Althorp from external pressure. Political reform reduced the overt authority of aristocratic families, but it did not dismantle their legal foundations. While influence became less visible, control remained intact. Althorp adjusted to new laws without surrendering ownership. Financial protection was equally important. Estates that relied on borrowing or speculative ventures often collapsed under debt. Althorp avoided these risks. Legal structures limited exposure and enforced financial discipline. The estate remained solvent, independent, and resistant to economic volatility. As taxation systems evolved, Althorp adapted quietly. Rather than resisting change publicly, it absorbed new obligations while preserving its core assets. Legal complexity acted as a barrier against interference. Outsiders rarely understood where true ownership rested, and this ambiguity reduced scrutiny. This legal insulation ensured continuity across generations. Individuals came and went, but the estate remained unchanged. Even personal failure could not easily threaten the structure itself. The law ensured that Althorp functioned as an institution rather than a possession. Over time, legal protection became one of Althorp's most effective defenses. It allowed the estate to exist comfortably within modern Britain while preserving centuries-old ownership. Authority no longer needed to be exercised openly. It was embedded within legal certainty. Today, Althorp appears as heritage, history, and culture. Yet behind this appearance lies a carefully protected structure. The law did not merely preserve Althorp. It transformed survival into permanence. Althorp Mansion did not rely on force or confrontation to endure. It relied on protection written into the system itself. Althorp Mansion's endurance was shaped as much by what it avoided as by what it protected. One of its most deliberate strategies was silence. Across centuries, many elite estates sought relevance through visibility. Public presence, political display, and social prominence were often used to assert influence. Althorp followed a different approach. It understood that visibility attracts scrutiny, while discretion preserves stability. By limiting exposure, the estate reduced the risks that accompany attention. Silence did not mean absence. Althorp remained present within systems, institutions, and networks, but it avoided unnecessary spectacle. Influence was exercised quietly, through continuity rather than confrontation. This restraint allowed the estate to exist comfortably. During periods when public opinion turned against visible power, as Britain modernized and democratic ideals expanded, overt aristocratic dominance became increasingly unacceptable. Estates that clung to visible authority often faced criticism or pressure to relinquish control. Althorp adapted by withdrawing from overt assertion without surrendering ownership. Power shifted from display to discretion. This quiet positioning protected the estate during periods of reform. While public narratives emphasized equality and change, Althorp remained legally secure and structurally intact. By avoiding controversy, it avoided becoming a target. Silence became a shield rather than a weakness. Discretion also influenced internal governance. Decisions were made with caution, patience, and long-term consequence in mind. Rapid expansion, dramatic transformation, or public experimentation were avoided. Stability was prioritized over recognition. The estate did not seek validation because it did not depend on it. Over time, Althorp's silence reshaped perception. The estate came to be viewed less as a center of authority and more as a cultural landmark. This shift reduced resistance while preserving control. What appeared to be withdrawal was, in reality, strategic adaptation. The absence of noise allowed Althorp to remain unchallenged. While attention moved elsewhere, the estate continued to function as it always had. Influence was no longer announced. It was assumed. This subtle normalization ensured acceptance rather than opposition. In contrast, many estates that sought relevance through public engagement faced instability. Visibility invited criticism. Criticism invited reform. Reform often led to loss. Althorp avoided this cycle by remaining quiet. Silence also preserved dignity. The estate did not compete for relevance in changing social climates. It allowed history to pass around it rather than through it. This patience ensured that Althorp remained steady while others reacted impulsively. Althorp Mansion survived not because it demanded attention, but because it understood when not to speak. In a world that rewards noise, its greatest strength became discretion. In the modern era, Althorp Mansion no longer presents itself as a center of authority. Instead, it appears as heritage. This shift in perception is not accidental. As public attitudes toward aristocracy changed, visible power became increasingly questioned. Estates that continued to project dominance often faced resistance, criticism, or forced transformation. Althorp adjusted by allowing its image to evolve while its structure remained unchanged. Today, Althorp is widely recognized as a historic estate rather than an active seat of influence. Visitors encounter architecture, gardens, and preserved interiors. What they see is culture and history. What they do not see is continuity of ownership, governance, and long-term control. The estate's power did not disappear. It changed how it was perceived. This transformation reduced confrontation. By existing comfortably within the category of heritage, Althorp avoided association with authority or dominance. It became familiar rather than threatening. This familiarity allowed it to remain stable within a society that increasingly favored transparency and equality. Public access played a strategic role in this transition. Opening parts of the estate to visitors created the impression of inclusion without surrendering control. The estate became observable but not accessible in any meaningful structural sense. Ownership remained intact. Decision-making remained private. Althorp's legacy also benefited from careful storytelling. History was framed through architecture, lineage, and cultural contribution rather than power. This narrative emphasized continuity and preservation rather than authority. The estate's role in national history was acknowledged, without inviting scrutiny of its ongoing position. As media attention shifted toward modern wealth and celebrity, Althorp remained outside this cycle. It did not compete for relevance. It allowed attention to move elsewhere. This absence reinforced discretion and protected the estate from the volatility of public interest. The result was stability. While modern institutions rose and fell, Althorp continued quietly. Its influence no longer needed to be asserted. It existed as part of Britain's accepted landscape, neither challenged nor questioned. Legacy in this sense became a tool, not a celebration of the past, but a mechanism for survival in the present. Althorp used history as insulation, allowing it to function without confrontation in a modern context. What distinguishes Althorp is not visibility, wealth, or recognition. It is continuity. The estate demonstrates that power does not always end. Sometimes it simply changes form. It becomes quieter, less obvious, and more embedded within accepted structures. Althorp Mansion did not lose relevance in the modern age. It redefined it. Althorp Mansions. Survival becomes clearer when it is, compared with modern forms of wealth. The difference is not money. The difference is time. New wealth often rises quickly. It is visible, celebrated, and widely discussed. Success is measured through recognition, expansion, and constant growth. But this speed creates exposure. Attention invites pressure, and pressure shortens lifespan. Many modern fortunes disappear as quickly as they appear. Althorp represents the opposite philosophy. Old estates like Althorp were never built for rapid expansion or public admiration. They were built for durability. Wealth was treated as something to be preserved rather than displayed. Growth was slow, controlled, and often invisible. This restraint reduced risk and increased longevity. Modern wealth often depends on volatile systems, markets, trends, public approval, or innovation cycles. When conditions change, these systems can collapse. Althorp was never dependent on such instability. Its foundation rested on land, legal structure, and continuity. These elements changed slowly, if at all. Another key difference lies in ownership mentality. New wealth is usually personal. It revolves around individual success, personality, and ambition. When the individual fails or withdraws, the structure weakens. Althorp avoided this vulnerability by separating identity from ownership. The estate existed beyond any single person. Visibility also plays a critical role. Modern wealth often seeks attention to validate success. Althorp avoided validation entirely. It did not compete for relevance or recognition. Silence protected it from the cycles of admiration and criticism that define modern prominence. This contrast explains why many new fortunes struggled to survive beyond a few generations. Without structure, restraint, and long-term planning, wealth fragments. Althorp survived precisely because it resisted fragmentation. Even today, this difference remains visible. New wealth reacts quickly to change, often restructuring in response to pressure. Althorp responds slowly, absorbing change without surrendering control. Its patience acts as insulation. The estate also benefited from predictability. Systems were designed to function regardless of external conditions. This reliability allowed Althorp to remain stable while others adapted aggressively, often at great cost. Althorp Mansion demonstrates that longevity is not created through constant reinvention. It is created through consistency. Old power does not need to prove itself repeatedly. It simply continues. This is why Althorp still exists as a functioning estate while countless Modern fortunes exist only as memory, not because it was richer, but because it was built differently. Old power does not chase the future. It waits for it. Althorp Mansion's survival becomes even more striking when compared to the many estates that did not endure. History is filled with noble houses that once held land, titles and influence yet vanished within a few generations. Their failure was rarely sudden. It was gradual, predictable, and rooted in common mistakes. One of the most frequent causes was fragmentation. Estates were divided among heirs in the name of fairness, weakening their foundation with each generation. Land lost coherence, authority became diluted, and influence slowly disappeared. Althorp avoided this outcome by treating the estate as indivisible. Unity was protected at all costs. Another cause was excess visibility. Many families sought recognition, influence at court, or public admiration. This attention often attracted opposition, scrutiny, and political risk. As public sentiment shifted, visible power became vulnerable. Althorp chose restraint. By remaining discreet, it avoided becoming a target during periods of reform and resentment. Financial mismanagement also played a decisive role in the collapse of many estates. To maintain appearances, some families borrowed heavily, sold land, or relied on unstable income sources. Short-term comfort undermined long-term survival. Althorp avoided excessive debt and preserved land even when restraint required sacrifice. Adaptation was another dividing line. Some estates resisted change aggressively, clinging to outdated systems until they collapsed. Others adapted too quickly, surrendering control in exchange for temporary security. Althorp followed neither extreme. It adjusted slowly, preserving structure while absorbing new realities. Personal ambition frequently undermined continuity. Estates tied too closely to individual. Success became vulnerable when leadership failed. Althorp reduced this risk by separating identity from ownership. Individuals mattered less than the system they inherited. Responsibility replaced freedom. Legal neglect also contributed to decline. Estates that failed to modernize their legal protections were exposed to taxation, division, and external pressure. Althorp maintained strong legal insulation, ensuring that ownership remained secure even as laws evolved. Perhaps most importantly, many estates misunderstood power itself. They treated wealth as something to be enjoyed rather than preserved. Althorp understood that survival required patience. It prioritized continuity over comfort, restraint over recognition, and structure over ambition. These choices explain why Althorp endured while others disappeared. Survival was not accidental. It was the result of deliberate discipline applied consistently across generations. Althorp Mansion stands today not as a symbol of dominance, but as evidence of endurance. It survived because it avoided the mistakes that history repeatedly punishes. Where others fragmented, it remained whole. Where others sought attention, it chose silence. Where others faded, it endured. And that endurance is what separates Althorp from estates that exist only in memory. Althorp Mansion's story does not end with admiration or nostalgia. It ends with understanding. Across 5 centuries, the estate did not rely on a single advantage to survive. It relied on a system. Land provided stability. Legal structure provided protection. Discipline prevented fragmentation. Silence reduced risk. Together, these elements formed a strategy that outlasted generations. What makes Althorp remarkable is not that it avoided change, but that it managed it carefully. The estate did not resist transformation blindly, nor did it surrender control in the name of progress. It adjusted when necessary and remained still when restraint was wiser. This balance allowed Althorp to move through history without being consumed by it. Modern society often equates power with visibility. Influence is measured through recognition, growth, and constant reinforcement. Althorp demonstrates a different model. Power does not always need to expand. Sometimes it only needs to endure. Longevity, not dominance, becomes the true measure of success. The estate also reveals a deeper lesson about ownership. Althorp was never treated as a possession to be enjoyed freely. It was treated as a responsibility to be preserved. Each generation inherited obligation before privilege. This mindset prevented impulsive decisions that destroy long-term stability. As centuries passed, Althorp became quieter, not weaker. It allowed attention to move elsewhere while it remained intact. This withdrawal was not retreat. It was adaptation. By existing comfortably as heritage, the estate avoided confrontation and preserved control. Today, Althorp Mansion stands as more than architecture or history. It stands as proof that survival can be intentional, that continuity can be engineered, that power does not need to announce itself to remain effective. Most estates failed because they misunderstood what it meant to last. They pursued comfort, visibility, or ambition. Althorp pursued structure. It treated time as an ally rather than a threat. In a world defined by speed and constant change, Althorp represents patience. It shows that endurance is not passive. It is deliberate, it is disciplined, and it is rare. Althorp Mansion did not survive because it was lucky. It survived because it was built to survive. 5 centuries later, the lesson remains clear. Power does not vanish when it stops being seen. Sometimes it simply becomes quiet and lasts.